Are you a sex worker looking to build a new website or a website redesign? Then you'll want to consider Fox Digital. They did a fantastic job designing my website, Stripped by Sia. If you want your website done, mention that you're a listener of the show at foxdigital.design for 20% off. Tell them I sent ya. Welcome back to another episode of Stripped by Sia, your podcast for strippers, sex workers, and all the fancy naked people in between. My name is Steph Sia, aka Kimchi, on stage. You can likely follow me. You can find me actually on stage later this week at the infamous Penthouse nightclub in Vancouver, BC. It's my home club. I haven't been there in a long time. Please come say hello. Please buy a dance for me. Tell me how much you love the show. Tell me how much you're going to love this amazing episode that we're going to be producing today. And just stay tuned because we have an amazing guest on today. But just want to say hello and give a warm welcome to all you new listeners out there. If it is your first time here or maybe your 100th time here listening, this episode and this podcast in general is all about sex work, actually. So it's all about destigmatizing sex work, and that's done through education, through the humanization of sex work, and by bringing different people from the industry on every single week, whether they're talent, they're in front of the camera, maybe they are part of a nonprofit organization that helps benefit sex workers, maybe they are working behind the scenes, maybe they're a producer. I try to bring on as many diverse people onto the show as I can to really paint and illustrate a really thorough view of what sex work is, because as you might know, there are a lot of people have a lot of opinions to say about us. Let's just say it like that. So I am bringing on a special guest today. It is going to be a little bit of a different episode this week. We actually are going to be talking about polyamory, and also going to be talking about a wonderful film that also came out as well. But before we go into introducing our guest, just a couple more things and people I need to mention as well. I just wanted to quickly say hello to all of our lovely Patreon subscribers. Hello. A lot of you are supporting the show financially through the Patreon there. And there you can find video exclusives. You can find video content from this episode, all episodes starting from season 5, a lot of bonus content, bonus episodes, announcements, and little things that I like to announce kind of before it gets released to the public. And subscriptions start at as low as $4 a month. So feel free to go ahead and give it a peep if you're interested in perhaps donating or supporting the show that way. It is patreon.com/strippedbysia. We are also on the Skyhawk After Dark TV network as well, where a lot of people that have been on the show also have podcasts. They also have video casts as well, all from the adult industry. If you are interested in hearing similar content like mine, feel free to go check them out. It's skyhawkafterdarktv.com. And last but not least, I know a lot of you are always like, hey, where can I get a really cool website made? I'm trying to break into the industry. I need to establish myself. And I also don't trust any other platforms that are taking cuts from me, or potentially getting your pages and your account suspended or deleted. It's a really great time to invest in getting a website getting made. So my partner, Fox Digital, has created my website. Lovely, lovely. Also offering all Strip by Sia listeners 20% off. Feel free to go ahead and give them a shout out there. Anthony is one who will be helping you out. It is foxdigital.design if you're interested in inquiring for the 20% off. Okay, so we are here. We are back. We had to go through all the things. But as I mentioned, we have an exciting guest on today and going a little bit left field today. But I also think the topic's really important because a lot of people have been curious about polyamory. And it has been quite a while since we have discussed polyamory on the show. Actually, we haven't had an episode on since Ricky and Jody, and that was back in the beginning of season 5. So it's been quite a while. But we are going to be bringing Stephanie Sellars onto the show today. Um, she is a filmmaker, a writer, producer, actor, and founder and artistic director of Immortality Productions. 2 years ago, she released Lust, Life, Love, a film about navigating polyamory and relationships. And it's a really great film. I would highly recommend everyone watching it, especially if you are perhaps curious about what polyamory is, how to navigate those relationships. And you are probably wondering, why am I bringing someone on who, is not a sex worker? I just feel like there is a lot of things in alignment with polyamory and sex work, as I'll kind of demonstrate throughout the episode here. And I'm sure Stephanie will also give us her opinions on that as well. But she's sitting so patiently here. Stephanie, are you there?
I am here. Yeah, and it's interesting. You said I am not a sex worker. That's true, but I did attempt to be one when I was in my early 20s. I tried to be a dom
Okay.
at a dungeon in New York City.
Of course.
Not long after 9/11, and yeah, it was. I was kind of going into it for the wrong reasons, and but anyway, I'm not like, it's not completely foreign to me. I've also done some burlesque performing.
Great.
Which is tangentially related, I think.
I think so, yeah. And we definitely have had burlesque performers on the show as well. Dominatrixes of many different capacities on the show as well. And I feel like everyone in my circle at least has dabbled at least a little bit in sex work. And if you are in sex work, you've definitely dabbled your fingers and toes in a lot of different forms and mediums of sex work. But today we're definitely going to be discussing your film, and I'm trying not to say any spoilers today, because I would definitely recommend people giving it a watch if they are curious about polyamory, or if you're just looking for a different film that's out there. It has won multiple awards. Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Gosh, I guess, geez, where to even begin? I would love to maybe just give my thoughts and just kind of feedback on it. I really enjoyed the film. It was beautifully shot. Really great to see a woman's perspective on polyamory. I just feel like a lot of times maybe we don't hear a woman's opinions sometimes on many topics like that. So yes, which is a thing as well. So, which is frustrating.
And the female gaze, right? Because in film, there's the male gaze. That's in a lot of films that are about this lifestyle that prior to my film have often been directed by men. So and through the male gaze. So that's not the only perspective.
No, and it's really refreshing to have you come on there to not only direct and produce the film, but also to star in it yourself as one of the main characters, Veronica. And just judging from my little research that I know of you from online, but also the film was quite autobiographical in certain capacity as well, and maybe many capacities actually. But maybe go into that a little bit in terms of okay, what inspired you to even
yeah so I have been involved with the polyamory, non-monogamy for a long time. And when I was in film school and thinking about what sort of screenplays to write, this was a topic that that came up as something I wanted to explore through film. And I at first I had the character be a lawyer, and kind of inspired by someone else I know. And then when I started talking to my advisor about it, he asked me some questions about my background, and then I told him I had written a sex and relationship column for a newspaper.
Right.
For a little over a year, and he was really intrigued by that. And he said, "Well, why don't you make the character more like you?" And I was like, "Oh, okay, yeah." And so there was that inspiration, and the whole narrative and the main relationship in the story is inspired by a relationship that I've had, and my experience with polyamory, like at first being a solo polyamorous, having multiple partners but not a primary partner, and then having a primary partner who was previously monogamous and who I introduced to the lifestyle and became a little bit more into it than I had expected, or just, it opened this whole Pandora's box and then ended up challenging me in ways that I did not expect. So,
right.
Yeah, so that's the truth that's behind the story. It's fictionalized, but it's there's a lot of truth in it.
Lots of truth indeed. I mean, gosh, first of all, was it terrifying that your advisor was like, maybe let's turn the focus to your own personal life and see that and see how that goes?
Yeah, I mean, even though I'm an introvert, I'm not shy about sharing my life and experience through my work, through my art, and like using my experience as a way to reach others, either to provoke or to move people. And so, yeah, I'm able to detach.
Mm-hmm.
And I have this ability to detach, from my experience once I'm, channeling it into art, and whether it's film or through other forms of writing that I do.
Right. And does that detachment also come into play as well? Because you acted in it too. So that's just like a couple of different dimensions here, but also
Yeah.
be very vulnerable and challenging. Tell us about that aspect.
Yeah, again, I'm saying it's like, even though the character is based on me, it is more of a persona, or she's a character. Veronica is like a part of me, or she is born from me, but she is also not entirely me. So I have that awareness going into it, and just enjoying playing. And during the editing process, I'm sitting there like watching myself on screen over and over again. And some people are not able to do that. They're like, oh, I can't look at myself.
Right.
And like, even actors, like,
Yeah.
they don't want to look at their work. And for me, it's just, yeah, it's like kind of looking in the mirror, and it's like, it's me, but it's not me. um, and then I'm able to sit back and then observe, as the director, and say, oh yeah, she's doing this, doing that, let's. And speaking about myself, or Veronica, her, in the third person. So yeah, that's helpful to the process.
Totally. And I mean, as you mentioned too, even actors kind of go through this. I would even extend that to people in our industry as well,
Mm-hmm.
like say adult actors also
Mm-hmm.
kind of can go through that too. Even as
Sure.
creators, some people don't like watching themselves. As a creator myself too, I personally don't mind watching myself. I think it's really great. It's fun
Mm-hmm.
to turn on sometimes too when I'm editing some of my clips, which is a lot of fun. But yeah, I mean, it's I just felt the piece to be very vulnerable, very, very intimate too. But perhaps before we go into more details, just because I do have some diverse listeners, like a lot of people within the sex work community, but also a lot of quote unquote civilian folks or people that are not in our industry that maybe are not familiar with the term polyamory.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we want to start there and kind of define those terms first before we move forward.
Sure. Polyamory is breaks down to many loves, from the Greek and Latin polyamory. And so it's having more than one romantic or sexual relationship at a time, but it's all consensual, which is, you know, most people are familiar with cheating as another way to have multiple relationships at the same time, but is, you know, it's very dishonest and causes a lot of hurt.
Oh, absolutely.
And yeah, so polyamory is an open way of of, of being with more than one person at the same time. There's also the term ethical non-monogamy or consensual non-monogamy, which kind of overlaps, but polyamory is more rooted in the romantic emotional connection rather than just you know, having multiple sex partners.
Right.
So there are these nuances in between the terms, and yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad that you defined that because I feel like a lot of people might often assume right away that you're just having sex with a lot of people. That
Mm.
I feel like that's like the first thing a lot of people that like when they think, oh, polyamory, that's the first thing that kind of comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
As well as some other assumptions like polygamy, that they get
Right.
polygamy and polyamory confused, or like even
Yes.
swinging.
Yeah.
So-
There's definitely some overlap between swinging and polyamory, in terms of there are a lot of polyamorous people who enjoy group sex and sex parties, swinging, but swingers are really, they're less interested in having romantic emotional connections with other
right.
people. They're usually primary partners, usually hetero couples, or like maybe the woman is bisexual. They have sex with other people but are kind of emotionally detached.
Right. There are no like emotional roots in
Right.
right. You've mentioned the term primary relationship a few times. Would you
Mhm.
also be able to define that as well for those who are unfamiliar?
Sure. So within polyamory, there are many different styles. So primary partner falls into the hierarchical form of polyamory, where there is a couple already established, and then that couple decides to open up their relationship. But because they already have an established relationship and are committed to each other, they kind of prioritize their relationship above others. And so that's where the term primary partner has come in. And I mean, I guess you can have a primary partner that develops through other forms of polyamory, like solo polyamory, for instance,
Mm,
where a person may not have a primary partner to begin with, but they have multiple partners that are more or less equal,
mm.
and then one of those partners becomes a primary partner. So there's so many different ways it could play
Develop.
out.
Yeah, definitely. That's so fascinating. I mean, I'm also curious too, Stephanie, how did you even get involved with the poly like relationships, with the lifestyle? Like how did you get involved with that? What's your story?
Yeah. Well, I always felt that monogamy didn't feel natural to me even as a teenager. Like I just felt kind of torn about it. You know, I subscribed to monogamy, but I was like always like, well, why can't I flirt with other people? Why can't I? Why I have all these other attractions, and then being bi curious, and then like wanting to have other experiences. And then I was in a relationship in my 20s where with the guy who wanted to explore in that way, like with
Mhm.
threesomes, and because I was sexually attracted to women, and I yeah, he helped me kind of get into that just through having threesomes, and then I wanted more of that, and I wanted to date women separately, and then I was casually dating another guy who was going to sex parties,
Mm-hmm.
so he invited me to one, and that's how I got into that.
Mm-hmm.
And so where Veronica is at the beginning of the movie, where she starts having all these multiple relationships, that's kind of, where I was after that initial exploratory phase of being introduced to threesomes and sex parties. And it was, after that relationship ended, I was practicing polyamory on my own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so
Yeah.
you've had quite the journey.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say, which has it sounds like it's been like quite the experience for you. Um, Also in the film, the other main character Daniel, who plays opposite of you, was
Mm-hmm.
the one that Veronica introduced at, or I guess met at one of the parties, and was
Mm-hmm.
introduced to polyamory, and that being really new, and how I perceived Daniel in the film to be like just very green, wanting
Yeah.
to explore and like almost kind of innocent in a way, which is really
Yeah.
cute to see it unfold, and also a great choice for getting some Asian representation there as well.
Yeah.
It was really refreshing to see that too. Um, Also with like some of the cultural stuff there as well, which is really really neat to see unfold on screen. But
Yeah, the cultural stuff like was not originally in the script, but because we cast Jake Choi as Daniel, we added those things
it was a
because
great
it made a lot of sense because you never know. Uh, the script can change, based on who you cast. If you don't have like a very specific idea of the type of ethnicity. I mean, I'm open. Daniel could, he didn't have to be a certain ethnicity, right?
right.
So he was perfect for the role.
No, it was great, and also just like it's like the scene with his mom too.
Yes, yes,
I thought that was really believable. I'm not Korean, but I mean, I'm Filipino Chinese, but they can be very like smothering.
yeah, no, he helped write that scene
Oh,
because
great.
that, I mean, because that was one of the scenes that we ended up shooting later, like a year after the main production. We had to shoot more scenes, and the specificity of that really came from his experience. I mean, I wrote the scene, but like it was after conversations with him.
So good.
Yeah,
It was so good.
glad you appreciate that.
But yes, like going back to Daniel's character, him being very green, not knowing how to really navigate through polyamory, and having Veronica to kind of anchor him and help guide him in a sort of way. But also, there were some red flags there in terms of like the miscommunication or lack of communication. Uh, Not a lot of discussion in terms of boundaries or what you call agreements. In polyamory. So I think it's also really a good time to discuss the importance of consent and boundaries in a polyamorous relationship.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, super important. And in the film, Veronica, she tries to teach him, but because he's so new at it, he messes up a lot, and then she gets messy because she's so vulnerable, right? She's like in love with him, and then she's not making the best decisions either. And yeah, so it's always best to have these discussions right up front, and
Hmm.
to talk about boundaries and agreements, and yeah.
That's really key. It goes along with sex work as well, because people also have assumptions along with polyamory too, in terms of like, I don't know, I feel like with polyamory and also with sex work, people just see the umbrella of sex
Mm.
and
Mm-hmm.
automatically try to think that one, you're available, two, you're just having sex all the time and fucking everyone and everything. But
Mm-hmm.
no, we actually do have preferences. We do have boundaries as well. There's things that we uh, would like to do, and there's things that we're not comfortable with doing. And that is so important to kind of have those conversations as early as possible, at least in my experience with clients,
Mm-hmm.
to really prevent any kind of disappointment, but also to determine what your expectations are. Would you kind of say it's a kind of a similar vein in poly?
Yeah, I think so, but I think it's a little bit more clear in sex work because it is a service, it's a transaction, and so it's like a container that's more defined, whereas in polyamory, it's, dating,
Yeah.
relationship, and, you're kind of in the seductive dance, and sometimes you're so turned on, you don't want to talk about these things, or it's like the beginning of something new, and you're just overwhelmed with the new energy and the romance, and you don't want to like bring in boundaries and have these clinical discussions, but at some point they are necessary.
Oh, definitely, for sure. I feel like when do you think is the best way, one question, to bring this up, but also two, when and how? Because as you mentioned, there's
Mhm.
so many converging factors that can, have bring up the topic of boundaries can quote unquote spoil mood or something.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean there are different aspects to it. So there's the boundaries regarding dating and the relationship, and then sexual boundaries. So I think if you're meeting people on apps, or if you are in a context where you already know they are polyamorous, whether it's like a poly mixer or something, you already know that it's already established, then you're already over the first step. If you don't know that, you need to bring that up and be like, hey, so I'm polyamorous. How about you? So that's number one, and then number two would be, I guess. So are you dating anyone else right now? Where are you right now in that? And then when it comes to sex, you could just get into it in the heat of the moment, but if it's I think if it's like a sex party or a BDSM kink event, it's easier to have a very clear discussion
Yes.
at the beginning because you're playing with strangers
Yeah.
in a public yeah, in a public space. And I mean public, private, public, in that there are other people around. And whereas if you're just dating someone, and you're feeling the chemistry and the energy, you could just let your body dictate and get into it. But as it's happening, if there's something that doesn't feel right, that's when you need to speak up
Hmm.
and say, well, maybe you don't have that clear conversation right away because you're like doing the dance and it just kind of happens organically. Um, but if like, oh, wait, actually, I don't really like fingering, or like, I'm not ready. I don't want to do penetration. That's going to take a little while, or
Yeah.
whatever, state
Right.
whatever you're okay with or not okay with, and don't just let it happen and then say afterwards, oh, that didn't feel great. I wish you hadn't done that. that's not a good way to go about it.
No, that's definitely not. And of course, yeah, in the heat of the moment, it's just not like a good timing.
Right, right.
In some situations, right? And I remember like in the film, I think it was maybe Daniel that said it, but I remember he said something like, I thought I could do whatever I want, or I thought you can do whatever
Mm-hmm.
you want.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that speaks to so many people that are out, like that are not in a polyamorous relationship. Like, oh, I thought you could just you have this freedom. You could just,
Yeah.
you do whatever you
Yeah.
want, right? But
Yeah.
not the case, right? It just depends on what you're agreeing upon,
Mm-hmm.
right?
For sure. And I think if it's always best to bring something up than not, because if you don't, the partner may assume that you don't have a problem with that thing.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, this kind of goes into the next kind of topic too, when we're tackling jealousy, and other feelings as well. Because, like in the film, I felt like Veronica was getting pretty uncomfortable with things that were going on between, and this is maybe a little bit of a spoiler for anyone who hasn't
Okay.
watched it. But yes, like how the relationship between Daniel and Maya was kind of growing, and where that
Mm-hmm.
they're going down a kind of like a different pathway, and
Mm-hmm.
try to kind of like, as you mentioned, skirting around Veronica, skirting around the topic. Maya also kind of dodging the topic when Veronica had asked, like explicitly asked her about it too. And
Mm-hmm.
I really wanted to talk about this too, because I feel, again, another common misconception or assumption is that because you're in a polyamorous relationship, cheating doesn't exist.
Mm. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not true.
No, right? Yeah. So I'd love to like maybe talk about jealousy, and when other feelings start to come into play. How
Mm-hmm.
do you deal with that? How do you cope? How do you
Mm.
with that?
Yeah. It's hard. Like some people naturally just get more jealous than others,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it has to do with different attachment styles, like how secure you are in relationship and intimacy. And but how to handle it is, well, first of all, be really clear about your needs and your boundaries. Is maybe um, you know from experience that it's really triggering when your primary partner uh,
Yeah.
stays overnight with another partner. I think
Yes.
that's, that's what comes up in the film as an example, and that's an agreement you have, and then the partner does that. So that would be like, if I'll just say he says, if he agreed to that and then he does that, then that's technically a sort of cheating, right? That's a kind of cheating. And I had also an experience in my personal life where with my husband, we're now separated, but we were dating a woman together, and we had told her that, if she ever wanted to date anyone else, to please talk to us about it, and we just want to be aware and have the conversation. And she ended up going on a trip and kind of withdrawing, and then when I questioned, hey, are we still in a relationship, then she said, no, I'm sorry, I met
No.
someone else and I want to be monogamous with this person. And it was
Yeah.
it was just like the ultimate betrayal, because we she had the opportunity to be open, and before that happened, to talk to us
Yeah.
about it, but she didn't. She ended up doing it, like cheating, and then like abandoning us, and it
Yeah.
was
That
just
sounds
awful. So
terrible. I'm
yeah, things
sorry
like
you
that
went
can
through
happen.
that. That's, oh gosh. I mean, and as mentioned, cheating does exist
Yeah.
in these types of relationships too. Um, Especially when like people are kind of going behind someone's back
Yeah.
and whatnot. I remember when I was kind of dabbling, not with polyamory, but like more with swinging, many years ago, I remember being involved with a couple and who had met at a party as well. And I was friends with them both, and I always had this communication. Like, I'm always going to be talking to the wife, and communication goes through her. And then, of course, things start to shift when the husband started talking to me directly. I'm like, well, does so and so know about this? Because I'm not comfortable talking to you alone if so and so is not in the loop about this. Because it makes you comfortable, and it feels like it's like a weird feeling in your stomach. Like, am I doing something wrong? I mean, so
yeah, it can be, especially for
yeah,
a third, if there's a triad situation, and if, if if there's a hierarchical couple, primary partners, and then the third person is kind of gets caught between the couple, like having a fight, or
yes, and very
it
awkward
can get really
too. So I'm like,
dramatic and messy.
I'm gonna withdraw from this situation. I'm not really gonna entertain that. So, I mean, on the flip side of things, because poly, of course, that means like multiple. Because you might be surrounded by more people. Does it ever feel isolating or lonely in some capacity at times? Because I felt that during the film too, with Veronica specifically, especially when this whole thing with Daniel and Maya was kind of growing, and I felt like she was kind of withdrawing herself as well. Then that kind of that whole scene at one of the kink parties that kind of exploded, and she had made some decisions there. Talk to us about that.
So I think if that the loneliness and isolation can occur when someone is feeling insecure in the relationship, like it doesn't have a solid foundation, and in Veronica and Daniel's case, like they didn't really have that solid foundation. They never established it, because as soon as they started sleeping together and dating, they went right into the poly, and didn't really establish trust and a solid foundation with each other. So I think that is a situation where, that's also in my experience, where you could just feel like you're a buoy in the sea, in the ocean. I mean, just rocked from side to side, and there's no like anchor. Okay, so maybe you're, or maybe like trapped in a car and you're flipping around, and there's, it's completely helpless, because there isn't that solid foundation. And it could also happen because sometimes people are drawn to polyamory because they are commitment phobic. They're afraid of commitment. They have insecure attachment. They have traumas that make it difficult for them to have their own self-love. So then, they tend to kind of have anxious tendencies toward attachment, or avoidant tendencies, where they'll want to be close, and then it feels like it's suffocating, so then they withdraw. And then, so like, oh well, if I'm polyamorous, then I don't have to get too close to people, or I don't have to if something starts to feel too threatening, then I'll just go to someone else, right? So that's like the unhealthy way to the unhealthy side to polyamory. Having healthy self-love and being anchored in yourself can help with the loneliness.
I mean, I'm sorry, just drawing another parallel with sex work too. and I don't know, maybe this is just my own kind of understanding or perspective on how I see polyamory, but there are some things in common with sex work in terms of like the stigma around it, even with the conversation that you had, not you had, Veronica had at the dinner table with her parents, and judgment going around that table with like the dad, the
Yes.
mom, the sister-in-law, the brother. Like there's a lot of opinions in that scene of a little bit fully charged.
Yeah, yes. That is true. It's not fully accepted. Like, it may, like being queer is perhaps it's a little less accepted, maybe, in some ways. Yeah, like some people like have this experience of coming out to their families about being polyamorous because they want to introduce their other partners, or have the opportunity to maybe not always have the same partner at family functions, and
Yeah, it can be tricky, and those conversations
can be tricky.
can also be quite tricky too. Even as a sex worker as well, like those can be difficult conversations to have.
Sure.
Also, coming out or being outed or being doxxed, because our work is so stigmatized, and people don't fully understand it. There is a lot of assumptions that's made about the work that we do, and sometimes like that can also be quite lonely as well, not having anyone to talk to or relate to as well in this line of work. So,
or maybe I imagine that you have to hide it in certain contexts, or use
being really
other
vague.
terms, like
Being
say
really
I'm a
vague about
dancer or
things,
something.
and of course, like not everyone is out. Like I'm an out sex worker, but there are a lot of folks that do not have that privilege to be out. They might put themselves in danger. They might have kids. Their kids might be taken away from them, stuff like that. So it can get really, really messy, and also just again really lonely at times when you're like, well, this is what I have to do to work. And it can be really quite challenging in those situations. So
yeah, definitely. I think like with just that there are stereotypes and assumptions associated with polyamory, like I think the same goes for sex work. Like, oh, they're all drug addicts, or polyamory is like,
I'm sure you hear that a lot.
oh, they're all nymphomaniacs.
Heard that a lot. Which is great.
Not lately.
I mean, that being said, again, going back to the film too, Daniel had come from a long-term 12-year monogamous relationship with his wife. And there was also, I think, in the beginning of the film, Veronica, I can't remember the name of her girlfriend at the time, but Joanne, there we go. Yeah, sorry about that. Joanne, I remember, and again, maybe it's a spoiler as well, but
it's okay.
Them kind of getting into an argument because Veronica had broken some rules as well in the beginning, and Joanne was like, well, I became poly for you, or something along those lines. I did for you. And as you know, like poly isn't the right fit for some folks. And that's the thing. Yeah. Can you?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah, and it can be very challenging for someone who falls in love with a poly person, but they are not poly. And there are some people who are fine with that. They're like, you go do your thing. I don't want anything to do with it. As long as you always come back to me, or as long as you honor these agreements, I'm okay with it. And then there are other people who just try to adapt to it, but it really doesn't feel right to them, or they just it's too triggering, so it doesn't feel safe to them. So you just have to learn and through experience or understand like what in order to understand what feels safe to you and what doesn't, and to see if this is something that is really who you are. And yeah, and once you discover that, then you
Definitely. I
then you
mean,
can make
I'm
choices
sure
from
you've
there.
heard of experiences where people come into poly relationships perhaps for the wrong reasons. And I'm sorry, I apologize, but I've heard this way too many times. But always men coming into or attempting to come into poly relationships, like cis men.
Yeah.
And again, going into this cycle of toxicity that we mentioned earlier, of, it just going along the cheating lines and stuff. So that,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think you have to don't apologize for that, because it's just
yeah.
something that it's a real thing, and it's like it is often straight men who um, go into it just so they can have a lot of sex with a lot of different people and not really be
Mm-hmm.
have a strong integrity about how their actions
Totally.
may be affecting their other partners,
Yeah,
or
yeah, it's a different kind of
yeah, just
motivation
more selfish.
for sure. Like I wouldn't even, to me, like that
Hmm.
doesn't even scream poly as at all. It just and it just screams like, okay, I just want to have sex with as
No.
many people as I want, and that's a lot of the experiences that I've heard from my friends in the poly community of cis men trying to get into this very specific circle of people and destroying some
Yeah.
relationships in that way. So it's hard.
Yeah, I think I'm developing a TV series about the same subject. And yeah,
Yeah,
and
you have to.
we're gonna have a character like that
Oh
who's
gosh, yeah. I
this
mean,
type of guy.
maybe
Yeah.
maybe I'm assuming, but with sex work, we're really careful and kind of protective of our community. I feel like with poly people, it's probably along the same lines
Mhm.
as well. Very protective. We're looking out for one.
Yeah, I think so. Is I think it the people who are really invested in it, they kind of create families, like poly families, and sometimes there are partners that overlap, and polycules, or all these other terms. um, and communal living situations, and so yeah, they are very protective, and they kind of the people who do it right, they don't want anyone to feel like neglected or hurt. I mean, this it's gonna inevitable that you're gonna hurt someone, it's in some way, and without realizing it. But then you talk about it. It's in
Yeah.
The intention is always like
Yes.
everyone has to feel safe and loved. That's the ideal. That is the ideal. Maybe an ideal
Hmm.
that's
Hmm. Do
it's
you
hard to
feel
reach
like
sometimes.
with that in mind, in terms of like, we want to keep everyone safe and I want everyone to be happy and feel loved and all that stuff, like, do you feel that gets more challenging, more difficult, with the more people involved? And I understand that not all poly relationships have multiple people, maybe one other person and whatnot, but I'd love to hear your take on that.
Right. Mm. Yeah. Most of my experience has either been like as a solo poly person or in a triad. with the primary partner. And in those situations, it's just, it can get tricky in a triad with like always like worried about, oh, is she okay? Is he okay? Or wait, or maybe one person taking on a caretaking role, and then it becomes imbalanced.
I was wondering about the imbalanced part.
And
like, how do you do that? Like for me, just I'm a monogamish person, and sometimes I feel like I am just, my energy output at the end of the day with one person is already like enough for me.
Oh, that's also a huge factor in whether or not polyamory is right for you. Do you have the time and energy for it? Because I think a lot of people are like, oh, I think I totally get it, but I just don't have the time and energy for it. Like I would do it. Like I don't have a problem with it. I think I kind of am polyamorous, but I don't have the time to have more than one relationship. It's hard enough to have one relationship to manage, right? And then I don't know. I think there are a lot of nerdy people who are polyamorous who are like really good about scheduling and having spreadsheets to manage all their really. I mean, I'm just making that up, but I think
maybe they do. Who knows?
Maybe they do, but just there's a lot of time management, and some people just don't want to put the time into it. And for me, I feel like when my polyamory is all, it's just like whatever happens organically. It's like I'm not usually seeking out like, oh, I need another partner, right? It's just like, oh, there's this other person I'm attracted to.
And that's just being a natural thing, which is
which happens with monogamy when you're monogamous also. It's just that you don't act on it.
True. I mean, going on that note, I know towards the end of the film, Veronica was also saying polyamory can be just as fucked up as monogamy, and I'd love to hear what you meant by that, or what Veronica meant by that.
Yeah, Veronica meant is that all relationships can cause hurt. Any kind of relationship can cause hurt, heartbreak, betrayal, abandonment, lack of trust, poor communication. These things don't go away with polygamory, and they are not pillars of monogamy either. I mean, people pretend that they are, and that's why they demonize polyamory. But the reality is that a lot of people cheat, and so it's just about being mindful, in whatever relationship style you choose, and to be aware that, to acknowledge that neither one is better than the other, and it's just a matter of knowing what you desire and need, and communicating that effectively to others so that you can have healthy relationships.
Right. I thought that was a really great way to kind of segue into the other, basically the closing scene of the film, which I thought was interesting because, again, I don't want to spoil anything, but like it was really interesting to hear how both Veronica and Daniel ended up and what their pathways were at the end of the film. And you know, it was different than I thought in the end. So it was a nice surprise. Really great to hear that. And for those who are wondering how it ended, I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to watch the film.
But it's definitely not where they started. Both of them are where they are at the beginning, that's where they are at the end is not. It's like almost the opposite.
Yeah, I thought it was a great end to the film too, because I'm really glad that nothing was all like super tied up and like tied a pretty bow at the end. So it was a great film to watch. But Stephanie, before I let you go, first of all, where can we watch the film Lust, Life, Love, and where can we also find you?
Yeah, so you can watch it on most VOD platforms, on Amazon, Google Play, Apple TV, Vudu. There are a few other ones, but you can go to lustlifelove.com. There's a link there where you can access all of them, or just Google Lust, Life, Love movie and you'll find it. You can buy or rent it, and you can find me and the film on social media. Lust, Life, Love on Facebook, or Lust, Life, Love movie on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Twitter is LLL film, the film. And me on Instagram at the _ Stephanie Sellars. So
that's all the places. We have all of the links in the show notes below, so feel free to give that a watch. I'd also love to hear everyone's thoughts on the show too, so don't forget to @ us. And if you want to get in touch with me for some reason, if you're enjoying the show, if you enjoyed this episode, if you want more episodes like this, please find me on Twitter and on Instagram. It's Stripped by Sia. Again, if you're interested in financially supporting the show, it's patreon.com/strippedbysia. If you're interested in coming on the show, you're welcome to pitch me at strippedbysia.com. And it is new episodes every single week, every single Sunday, dropping at midnight. And we'll catch everyone in for another episode next Sunday. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining me today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
Thank you. You're listening to Stripped by Sia, hosted, produced, and edited by Steph Sia. Music by Ted D. Graphic design by Maria Bellandirama, and photography by Ian Dabrin.